I was walking out of my statistics class when I saw them. All four tires on my Honda Civic completely shredded, the rubber hanging in strips like some kind of sick art project. My heart just dropped straight into my stomach because I knew exactly what this meant for my bank account. And honestly, I had been so careful about saving every penny for my university transfer application that was due in 3 months. The campus parking lot was nearly empty at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, and the overhead lights cast these weird shadows that made everything look more ominous than it probably was. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, just staring at my car, like maybe if I looked long enough, the tires would magically repair themselves, or I would wake up from whatever nightmare this was supposed to be. But no such luck, because when I crouched down to get a better look, the cuts were deep and deliberate. Not the kind of damage you get from hitting a curb or driving over glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I called my mom first because that's what you do when you're 22 and still living at home trying to save money. Carmen answered on the second ring with that worried voice she always gets when I call after 8 p.m., like something terrible must have happened for me to be contacting her past her preferred communication hours. Mija, what's wrong? You never call this late unless there's an emergency. Mom, my tires got slashed at school and I don't know what to do. And the tow truck is going to cost at least $60, and that's money I really can't afford to spend right now. The words came out in this breathless rush because I was trying not to cry and trying not to think about how this was going to completely derail my budget for the next 2 months. There was this pause on the other end, and I could hear my dad, Miguel, in the background asking what was happening and my mom telling him to hold on a minute. Then she came back with this dismissive tone that I wasn't expecting. Sheena, you probably just parked in a bad area or around the wrong people. You know how these college campuses can be, especially at night with all kinds of troublemakers hanging around looking for easy targets. But Mom, I always park in the same spot, and I've never had any problems before, and the security cameras should have caught whoever did this. I was trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the frustration building because this wasn't the response I was hoping for. Well, did you check with campus security to see if they actually have footage or if their cameras even work properly? Because half the time, these places just put up fake cameras to make people feel safer. She sounded like she was already moving on to something else, probably organizing her endless collection of kitchen storage containers or folding laundry with that mechanical precision she brought to every household task. My dad got on the phone then, and his voice had that tired quality it always gets after long days at the construction site. Sheena, just call AAA and have them tow it to that tire place on Maple Street, and we'll figure out the money situation tomorrow. But right now, you need to get home safely. So that's what I did. I spent $75 I didn't have on a tow truck and another $460 the next morning on 4 new tires. Because apparently whoever did this wanted to make sure I couldn't just replace 1 or 2 and call it good. The guy at the tire shop, Miguel, looked at the cuts and shook his head like he'd seen this kind of thing before. This wasn't random vandalism, miss. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, and they had the right tools for the job. These cuts are too clean and too purposeful to be some drunk college kid with a pocket knife. But when I brought this information home to share with my family during dinner that night, sitting around our scratched wooden table under the flickering fluorescent light that Miguel keeps saying he's going to replace, the response was more of the same dismissive energy I'd gotten the night before. You're overthinking this, Sheena, Carmen said while passing around the pot of rice and beans she'd made with that sofrito recipe her mother taught her back in Puerto Rico. Sometimes bad things just happen and there's no big conspiracy behind it. Ethan, who had been unusually quiet during the whole conversation, suddenly looked up from his plate with what seemed like genuine concern. That really sucks about your car, Sheena. I know how hard you've been working to save up for university, and this kind of setback must be really stressful. I was surprised by his sympathy because usually Ethan and I operated in completely separate spheres around the house. He worked his shifts at the grocery store stocking shelves and spent most of his free time in his room playing video games or hanging out with his friend Daryl, while I juggled community college classes and my part-time job at the campus bookstore. We weren't hostile toward each other, but we weren't particularly close either. Thanks, Ethan. It just really sucks timing because I was finally getting ahead financially, and now I'm basically back to square one. I appreciated that someone in my family was acknowledging how frustrating the situation was, instead of just telling me to get over it and move on. Listen, if you need help covering some of the cost, I can probably chip in $50 or $60 for my next paycheck. I know it's not much, but every little bit helps, right? Miguel nodded approvingly at this display of sibling solidarity. See, that's what family does for each other. We help out when someone is going through a rough patch. Carmen smiled and reached over to squeeze Ethan's shoulder. That's very thoughtful of you, mijo. Sheena, you should take him up on that offer, because pride isn't going to pay for those tires. I agreed to let Ethan contribute to the tire fund, even though something about the whole situation still felt off to me. Maybe it was the tire shop guy's certainty that this had been a deliberate, targeted attack, or maybe it was just my natural paranoia kicking in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than random campus vandalism. That night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling around me. Carmen and Miguel's television playing some Spanish-language news program, Ethan's video game music bleeding through the thin walls, the neighbor's dog barking at something in their backyard. Everything seemed normal and safe and exactly like it always was, but I couldn't stop thinking about those clean, precise cuts in my tires and wondering who would want to target me specifically. 3 weeks later, I was closing up the campus bookstore where I worked 15 hours a week selling overpriced textbooks to stressed-out students when I noticed Alex Kim standing by the employee parking area, looking concerned. Alex worked part-time as a mechanic at his uncle's auto shop and picked up weekend shifts at the bookstore to help pay for his engineering degree. So seeing him examining my car wasn't necessarily alarming, but it definitely got my attention. "Hey, Alex, what's going on over there?" I called out while locking the front door and wondering why he was crouching down next to my Honda instead of walking to his own beat-up Toyota. "Sheena, you need to come look at this right now," he said without looking up from my rear tire. His voice had this urgency that made my stomach clench because I already knew what I was going to find before I got close enough to see the damage. All 4 tires slashed again. Same precise cuts, same deliberate pattern, and same sinking feeling in my chest as I realized this was definitely violent coincidence anymore. But this time, I had Alex there to examine the evidence with him, with his mechanical expertise, and that made all the difference in how I processed what had happened. "Sheena, this is really sophisticated work," Alex said while running his fingers along the cuts. "These cuts are angled to cause maximum damage, and they're positioned to make the tires completely unusable rather than just causing slow leaks." I crouched down next to him and looked at the damage more closely. So this definitely wasn't random. Not even close. Someone specifically targeted your car and they knew exactly what they were doing. This is the kind of tire slashing you see when someone wants to send a message or trap someone financially. Alex stood up and brushed his hands off. "Have you been having problems with anyone lately? Ex-boyfriend, angry classmate, someone from work?" I thought about it, but couldn't come up with anyone who had a reason to sabotage my car. I honestly can't think of anyone who would want to hurt me like this. I keep to myself mostly, and I don't really have drama with people. Alex offered to help me document everything before calling for another tow truck. He took pictures of the cuts from multiple angles and made notes about the type of damage and the tools that would have been required. "We should start keeping a record of these incidents," he said while photographing the tire that had been cut most severely. "If this happens again, you're going to want to have evidence to show the police." The idea of involving police made me nervous because I knew how my parents had reacted to that suggestion last time. But Alex's logical approach to the whole situation was reassuring in a way that my family's dismissiveness hadn't been. Here was someone taking my concern seriously and offering practical solutions instead of just telling me to hide at home and hope the problem went away. I started keeping a detailed log the next day, writing down everything I could remember about both tire slashing incidents. Times, locations, weather conditions, who I had talked to that day, where I had been before discovering the damage. The research I did online was both helpful and terrifying. There were entire forums dedicated to stalking and targeted harassment, with detailed discussions about how tire slashing was often used as a control tactic because it was expensive enough to cause financial stress, but not serious enough for police to prioritize. One post from a woman in Oregon described how her ex-boyfriend had slashed her tires repeatedly over 6 months as a way to keep her financially dependent and unable to leave their shared apartment. But I didn't have an ex-boyfriend or anyone in my life who had obvious motives for this kind of harassment. My social circle was pretty limited to family, coworkers, and classmates, and I couldn't think of anyone who seemed hostile or threatening. The more I researched, the more confused I became about who might be targeting me and why. Ethan's behavior around the house was becoming increasingly strange during this time. He would leave conversations abruptly when I brought up the tire incidents, and I caught him several times standing near my bedroom door like he was listening to my phone calls. When I asked him directly what was going on,
We're saying that maybe you shouldn't be so quick to dismiss our advice about limiting your exposure to these dangerous situations, Carmen replied while patting my hand in what was probably supposed to be a comforting gesture. Ethan was sitting in the armchair across from us, and I noticed he kept glancing at me during these exchanges with this expression I couldn't read. Not exactly guilty, but definitely uncomfortable, like he knew something about the conversation that I didn't. After the movie ended and my parents went to bed, I was putting away the leftover popcorn when Ethan approached me in the kitchen. Sheena, can I ask you something about these tire incidents? Sure, what do you want to know? Do you really think someone is specifically targeting you? Or do you think maybe you're just having bad luck with parking in areas where this kind of thing happens? The question annoyed me because it echoed the same dismissive attitude I'd been getting from our parents. Alex looked at them and confirmed that someone with proper tools and knowledge did this. Right, but Alex isn't a police officer or a detective. Maybe he's not as qualified to make that determination as you think. I stared at him, wondering why he was suddenly so invested in convincing me that these incidents were random. Why are you arguing with me about this? I thought you were sympathetic about the financial impact. I am sympathetic. I just don't want you to get paranoid and start seeing threats everywhere when maybe there's a simpler explanation. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about Ethan's questions and wondering why everyone in my family seemed so determined to convince me that I was overreacting to what was clearly a pattern of targeted harassment. But I also thought about my conversation with Mrs. Thompson from earlier that week, when she had mentioned installing new security cameras after some suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Mrs. Thompson lived 3 houses down from us and had taught 4th grade for 35 years before retiring. She was one of those sharp, observant people who noticed everything that happened on our street. And if anyone had information about suspicious activity, it would be her. I decided that tomorrow I would approach Mrs. Thompson about whether her new cameras might have captured anything relevant to my car troubles. If someone was systematically targeting me, then maybe it was time to start gathering real evidence instead of just relying on my family's opinions about what I should or shouldn't do to protect myself. The log I was keeping had already revealed some interesting patterns. Both incidents had happened on Tuesday nights after my evening statistics class, and both times my car had been parked in relatively isolated areas where someone could work on the tires without being easily observed. If this pattern continued, then Tuesday nights were when I needed to be most careful and most vigilant about documenting anything suspicious. Alex had offered to help me stake out my car next Tuesday to see if we could catch whoever was doing this. And I was seriously considering taking him up on that offer, despite knowing that my parents would probably have strong opinions about me involving a male coworker in my personal safety concerns. But at this point, I was more interested in finding answers than in keeping my family comfortable with my choices. A month later, it happened again. And this time, it was at the grocery store parking lot, where I had been shopping with my mom since I was old enough to push a cart.
I came out of work on a Thursday evening around 6:30 and found all four tires completely destroyed in that same methodical way that was becoming sickeningly familiar. The grocery store where this had never been a problem before, where I'd parked hundreds of times without incident, where the security guards knew me by name because I'd been coming there for years. This third incident completely wiped out what little savings I had managed to rebuild over the past month. $480 for new tires, plus another $70 for the tow truck, and just like that, my university transfer application fund was gone. Not delayed, not reduced, but completely eliminated because I had exactly $37 left in my checking account after covering the tire replacement, and I still had rent money to give my parents and gas money for the rest of the month. I called Alex from the grocery store parking lot while waiting for the tow truck, and he could hear the defeat in my voice before I even explained what had happened. Sheena, this has got to stop. 3 incidents in 2 months isn't bad luck anymore. It's targeted harassment, and we need to involve the police, whether your parents like it or not. I know you're right, but I'm scared of how they're going to react if I go against their advice about not escalating the situation. I was sitting on the curb next to my destroyed car, watching other people load their groceries into functional vehicles, and feeling like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare loop. Listen, I'll go with you to file the police report if that would help. You don't have to handle this alone, and you definitely don't have to keep absorbing these financial hits without fighting back. When I got home and explained what had happened, Miguel's reaction was so intense that it caught me completely off guard. He was sitting at the kitchen table reading work emails on his phone when I walked in, and when I told him about the third tire slashing incident, he slammed his hand down on the table hard enough to make the salt and pepper shakers jump. Absolutely not, Sheena. You are not involving the police in this family's business over some petty vandalism that they're not going to care about anyway. His voice had this angry edge that I rarely heard except when he was dealing with difficult contractors at work. Carmen emerged from the laundry room carrying a basket of folded clothes and immediately backed up McGill's position. Your father's right, Mija. Police are going to think you're some paranoid girl who can't handle normal city problems, and once you get a reputation as someone who calls police over minor incidents, they stop taking you seriously when you actually need help. But this isn't minor anymore. This is the third time in 2 months, and it's costing me hundreds of dollars each time, and now I can't afford to apply to university this semester. I could feel my voice getting higher and more desperate because their resistance to involving authorities was so strong that it was starting to feel suspicious. Why are they so determined to keep this situation contained within the family? Why are they more interested in convincing me to abandon my goals than in helping me find out who was targeting me? That night, I lay in bed feeling more isolated and confused than I had since this whole nightmare started. My family's reaction to the idea of police involvement was so extreme and so coordinated that it was starting to trigger all kinds of suspicious thoughts I didn't want to have. Why were they so determined to keep the situation contained within the family? Why were they more interested in convincing me to abandon my goals than in helping me find out who was targeting me? The next morning, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to contact the police myself, regardless of what my family thought about it, and I was going to do it secretly so they couldn't interfere with the investigation or try to convince me to back down. Detective Sarah Martinez at the local police station took my call seriously from the first minute, which was such a relief after weeks of being told I was overreacting. She had a calm, professional voice and asked detailed questions about each incident that made me feel like she understood the pattern I was seeing. 3 targeted tire-slashing incidents in 2 months definitely warrants investigation, she said after I'd explained the situation. Can you come in tomorrow morning to file a formal report and bring any documentation you've been keeping? I scheduled the appointment at 10 a.m. on a day when I knew my parents would both be at work and Ethan would be sleeping in after his late shift. When I met with Detective Martinez in person, she was exactly what I needed her to be: thorough, empathetic, and completely willing to take my concerns at face value instead of dismissing them as paranoia.
Have you considered that this might be someone close to you? She asked as she was reviewing my incident log. Tire slashing as harassment often involves people who have access to information about the victim's schedule and routines. The question made my stomach clench because it was something I'd been trying not to think about. You mean like someone in my family or social circle? It's more common than people realize. Family members, coworkers, neighbors, people who can observe your patterns without seeming suspicious. She closed my file and looked at me directly. I'm going to start an official investigation, and I want you to keep documenting everything, but I also want you to be very careful about who you share information with until we figure out who's doing this. After leaving the police station, I drove straight to Mrs. Thompson's house to ask about her security cameras. She answered the door in her garden gloves and a sun hat, looking exactly like the retired teacher she was, organized, alert, and ready to solve problems. Of course I've been capturing footage of the street, she said after I explained what was happening. I installed those cameras specifically because there's been suspicious activity in the neighborhood, and I wanted to have evidence if anything serious happened. We went into her living room where she had a whole security system set up on her computer desk. Multiple camera angles, motion detection alerts, and weeks of archived footage stored on external hard drives. Mrs. Thompson was clearly someone who took documentation seriously. Let me pull up the footage from last Thursday when your car was vandalized at the grocery store, she said, while clicking through files on her computer. I remember getting a motion alert around 11:45 p.m., but I didn't think to connect it to your car troubles. When the footage loaded, we could see a figure in a dark hoodie approaching my Honda around 11:45 p.m. The person moved purposefully toward my car, crouched down next to the rear tires for several minutes, then walked quickly back toward the street and out of camera range.
Can you make out any identifying features? I asked while staring at the grainy black and white image. Mrs. Thompson enhanced the footage as much as her system allowed, but the person's face was hidden by the hood, and the image quality wasn't clear enough for definitive identification. Still, there was something about the figure's gait and build that seemed familiar, in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. I'll make you a copy of this footage to take to the police, Mrs. Thompson said while burning the video onto a DVD. And I'm going to start monitoring more carefully to see if we can catch this person in the act. Driving home with the security footage felt like carrying evidence of my own worst fears. The person on Mrs. Thompson's camera moved like someone who knew our neighborhood, someone who felt comfortable walking around at midnight without worrying about being questioned or stopped, someone who belonged here. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Thompson's enhanced camera system captured exactly what we needed. Another tire slashing incident, this time with multiple camera angles and better lighting that clearly showed the perpetrator's face when he looked up toward the streetlight. And when I saw that face on Mrs. Thompson's computer screen, my entire world collapsed. It was Ethan, my brother. The person who had offered to help pay for my first set of replacement tires. The person who had been acting strange and uncomfortable during family discussions about the incidents. The person who had access to my schedule, my parking locations, and my family's dismissive attitudes toward involving police. I printed out clear screenshots of his face from the security footage and drove home in a state of shock that felt like being underwater. Everything made sense now. His guilty expressions, his defensive behavior, his attempts to convince me the incidents were random, my parents' extreme resistance to police involvement. This wasn't random vandalism by a stranger. This was a family conspiracy designed to keep me financially trapped and dependent. I found Ethan in our garage working on his bicycle when I confronted him with the evidence. He took one look at the printed screenshots, and his face went completely white. "Sheena, I can explain this. It's not what it looks like," he said while setting down his bike tools with shaking hands. "Really? Because what it looks like is my brother systematically destroying my property and sabotaging my future." I held up the photos so he could see them clearly. "How long has this been going on, and why are you doing this to me?" Ethan sat down on an old paint bucket and put his head in his hands. For several minutes, he didn't say anything, and I thought he was going to try to deny everything despite the photographic evidence. But then he started talking in this broken, defeated voice that I'd never heard him from before. Mom and Dad said I was helping the family. They said you were being selfish trying to leave home when we all needed to stick together and support each other. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. They promised to pay for my GED classes if I helped teach you responsibility by creating some financial obstacles. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. So all three of you have been working together to sabotage my life? It wasn't supposed to be sabotage. Mom said it was just temporary setbacks to help you realize that family should come first and that you weren't ready for the independence you thought you wanted. Ethan wiped his nose on his sleeve like a little kid. She said if you had to struggle financially for a while, you'd appreciate what you have at home more. I stared at my brother and felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of my family. Ethan, do you realize what you've done? You've stolen my future. You've taken away my chance to transfer to university this semester. You've forced me to spend money I don't have on repairs for damage you cause. I know, and I'm sorry, and I tried to stop after the second time, but Mom said I had to follow through or they wouldn't help me with school, and they'd tell everyone I was too much of a failure to commit to anything. He was crying now. Ugly, desperate tears that should have made me feel sympathetic, but mostly just made me feel sick. Armed with Ethan's confession and Mrs. Thompson's video evidence, I finally understood the full scope of what had been happening to me. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or random bad luck. This was coordinated emotional and financial abuse designed to control my choices and limit my independence. And now I had to decide what to do with this information and how to protect myself from the people who were supposed to love and support me. I waited until dinner the next night to confront my parents because I wanted them both there and I wanted Ethan to witness what was about to happen. I had printed out additional copies of the security footage and organized all my documentation into a folder that I placed on the kitchen table next to the rice and beans Carmen had prepared, like this was going to be a normal family meal, instead of the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family. I have something important to discuss with everyone, I said after we had all sat down and Miguel had finished saying grace. Mija, what are you talking about? Did you finally figure out which area you need to avoid parking in? No, Mom. I figured out that it's been Ethan this whole time. I opened the folder and placed the screenshots in the center of the table where everyone could see them clearly. Mrs. Thompson's security cameras caught him in the act, and he's already confessed to everything, including the fact that you and Dad have been paying him to do it. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in our house. Miguel set down his fork very carefully and stared at the photos without saying anything, while Carmen went through this series of micro-expressions that looked like she was calculating how to respond. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on his plate like he was hoping the floor would open up and swallow him. Finally, Carmen spoke in this perfectly calm voice that was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. Sheena, I think you're misunderstanding what you're seeing in these photos. Sometimes images can be misleading, and people can convince themselves they see things that aren't really there. Are you seriously going to deny this when Ethan already admitted everything to me yesterday? Look at my brother, who was still refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Tell them what you told me about Mom promising to pay for my GED classes if I help sabotage my car. Ethan, is that true? Miguel asked in this disappointed father voice like he was hearing about this for the first time. Ethan glanced up nervously between our parents and me, and I could literally see him wavering between telling the truth and protecting himself. I mean, maybe I was near Sheena's car a few times, but that doesn't mean I was doing anything wrong. Maybe the camera just caught me walking by or checking to see if she needed help with something. I stared at him in complete disbelief.
Ethan, you confessed to me yesterday. You told me everything about how Mom and Dad convinced you to do this. You were crying and apologizing and admitting that you knew it was wrong. Carmen reached over and put her hand on Ethan's shoulder in this protective gesture. Sweetheart, it sounds like your sister pressured you into saying things that weren't true. Sometimes when people are desperate to find someone to blame, they can be very convincing even when they're wrong. This is unbelievable, I said while looking around the table at my family. You're all going to sit here and lie to my face when I have video evidence and a confession? Miguel cleared his throat and adopted his reasonable patriarch voice. Sheena, I think you need to consider the possibility that you've become so focused on finding a conspiracy that you're misinterpreting normal family interactions. Your brother loves you and would never deliberately hurt you. Then explain why you've been so opposed to involving the police if you have nothing to hide. Explain why you've been trying to convince me to give up on university and stay home. Explain why your first reaction to 3 targeted attacks was to restrict my activities instead of helping me find out who was responsible. Carmen's expression shifted into this hurt, disappointed look that she used when she wanted to make me feel guilty for questioning her motives. Mija, we've been trying to protect you from getting involved with police because we know how these situations can escalate.
We don't want you to get hurt. Everything we've suggested has been out of love and concern for your safety. You've been trying to control me, I said, and hearing myself say it out loud made everything click into place. You don't want me to transfer to university because you don't want me to be independent. You want me to stay here and be financially dependent on you forever. Miguel slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. That's enough, Sheena. I will not sit here and listen to you accuse your family of some ridiculous conspiracy when we've done nothing but support you and worry about your well-being. If you continue with these paranoid accusations and refuse to accept that sometimes bad things just happen randomly, then maybe you need to consider whether this house is the right place for you to be living, Carmen added with tears in her eyes that looked completely genuine. The threat was clear, and the gaslighting was so intense that for a moment I actually started to doubt my own memories of Ethan's confession. But then I looked at the security footage on the table showing my brother's face clearly visible as he destroyed my property, and I realized that this was exactly what Detective Martinez had warned me about when she said family members often use emotional manipulation to cover up their crimes. I'm taking this evidence to the police, I said while gathering up the photos and standing up from the table, and I'm not going to let you convince me that I imagined any of this. Detective Martinez moved quickly once I brought her the security footage and Ethan's recorded confession that I had secretly made on my phone during our garage conversation. She scheduled interviews with all my family members and contacted Mrs. Thompson to get the original video files directly from her security system. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Ethan's friend Daryl Jackson showed up at the police station 2 days after the family interviews and asked to speak with Detective Martinez about information related to my case. Apparently, his conscience had been bothering him ever since Ethan had started acting weird and guilty around him. And when he heard through mutual friends that there was an official police investigation, he decided he needed to tell someone what he had witnessed. I heard Mrs. Rodriguez talking to Ethan multiple times about when and where Sheena would be parking her car. She would give him specific instructions like, Tuesday night after her statistics class, she always parks in the back row of the campus lot. Or Thursday evenings, she goes grocery shopping and parks near the pharmacy entrance. According to Daryl, Carmen had provided Ethan with a special tire-cutting knife that she kept hidden in her sewing room, and she had coached him on how to make the cuts look professional so that Sheena would be forced to replace all 4 tires instead of just patching 1 or 2. Miguel had been present for several of these planning conversations and had specifically discussed how the financial strain would force me to delay university and remain dependent on the family. Mr. Rodriguez said something about how if Sheena had to keep spending her savings on car repairs, she would realize that moving away from home was financially impossible. He called it teaching her responsibility, but it was obvious they were trying to trap her.
Based on Daryl's testimony, Detective Martinez obtained a search warrant for our house. She executed it on a Wednesday morning when my parents thought I was at class, but I was actually at the police station helping to coordinate the search. Watching uniformed officers go through my family's belongings looking for evidence of their conspiracy against me was surreal and heartbreaking and validating all at the same time. They found everything. Text messages between Carmen and Ethan coordinating the timing of attacks, the tire-cutting knife hidden in Carmen's sewing supplies exactly where Daryl said it would be, a notebook where Carmen had been tracking my schedule and noting optimal times for sabotage, even receipts showing Miguel had reimbursed Ethan for gas money on the nights when tire-slashing incidents occurred. Detective Martinez called me that afternoon to update me on what they had discovered. Sheena, this was a coordinated conspiracy involving both your parents and your brother. We have enough evidence to charge them with criminal harassment, conspiracy, destruction of property, and endangering the welfare of a dependent adult. The phrase endangering the welfare of a dependent adult hit me particularly hard because it made me realize how completely my family had been controlling my life under the guise of protection and support. They had systematically sabotaged my attempts at independence while convincing me that I needed them to survive, and they had used my brother as their weapon against me while making him believe he was helping the family. What happens next? I asked while sitting in my car outside the police station trying to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. We'll be making arrests tomorrow morning. I want you to stay somewhere safe tonight because your family is going to know the investigation has expanded when they see the search warrant inventory. Do you have somewhere you can go where they can't pressure you to change your statement or convince you to drop the charges? Alex had already offered to let me stay at his apartment when I had told him about confronting my family. So I drove straight to his place with a bag of essential belongings and tried to figure out how to rebuild my life after discovering that the people who raised me had been systematically undermining my future for months. The arrests happened at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning while I was drinking coffee in Alex's kitchen and trying to pretend I wasn't completely terrified about what came next. Detective Martinez called to let me know that Carmen and Miguel had been taken into custody without incident and that Ethan had agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence and mandatory therapy. Your parents are being charged with conspiracy to commit harassment, destruction of property, and financial abuse, Detective Martinez explained over the phone.
The attorney is taking this seriously because of the systematic nature of the abuse and the fact that they used your brother as an accomplice. Carmen's reaction to being arrested was exactly what I expected. She hired a lawyer who immediately started making statements to local news outlets about how she was a devoted mother being persecuted for trying to protect her daughter from the dangers of college life. She claimed that any coordination with Ethan had been misunderstood and that she had only been trying to teach me financial responsibility and family loyalty. Miguel maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence, claiming that he had never directly participated in planning the tire-slashing incidents and that any conversations Daryl had overheard were taken out of context. His lawyer argued that being present during planning discussions didn't make him a co-conspirator, just a father who had failed to stop his wife's misguided attempts to keep the family together. The plea bargain negotiations took several weeks, during which I stayed at Alex's apartment and tried to figure out how to restart my life. Alex's family welcomed me with the kind of healthy support I had never experienced before, helping me apply for emergency financial aid, driving me to court appearances, letting me use their address for university applications, treating me like someone whose goals and independence were worth supporting rather than undermining. Ethan's cooperation with the prosecution was complete and devastating to our parents' defense. He provided detailed testimony about how Carmen had recruited him by exploiting his insecurities about academic failure and promising him financial support and parental approval in exchange for sabotaging my car. He admitted that Miguel had been present for planning sessions and had specifically suggested targeting my vehicle at locations where I felt safe and secure. They made me believe I was helping to keep our family together,
Ethan testified during his plea hearing, but I realize now that what they were really doing was using me to hurt my sister and control her choices. The final sentences were handed down in late spring. Carmen received 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling with a focus on controlling behavior and family dynamics. Miguel got 18 months probation and anger management classes. Both of them were ordered to pay full restitution for all the tire replacement costs plus punitive damages. But more importantly, for my immediate future, I was granted a restraining order that prohibited any of them from contacting me directly or indirectly, and I was awarded emergency financial aid that allowed me to complete my university transfer application and move into a dorm room 300 miles away from the family that had tried so hard to keep me trapped. Moving out of Alex's apartment and into my own space felt like being reborn. For the first time in my adult life, I had complete control over my schedule, my finances, my social interactions, and my goals. No one was monitoring my activities or undermining my plans or trying to convince me that independence was dangerous and selfish. Alex and I had grown closer during the months I spent recovering from my family's betrayal, and by the time I left for university, we had developed the kind of relationship based on mutual support and respect that I hadn't even known was possible. He visited me on campus regularly, and we talked every day about our separate lives and shared future, building something healthy and honest from the foundation of trust we had established during the worst period of my life. 6 months later, I was sitting in the campus library at State University working on my sociology research paper about family dynamics and control mechanisms, when I realized how far I had come from that terrified girl who had found her tires slashed in a community college parking lot. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now studying the very psychological patterns that had nearly destroyed my life. But there was something powerful about being able to analyze those experiences through an academic lens rather than just surviving them. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan asking if I wanted to meet for coffee at the Starbucks near campus. We had been slowly rebuilding some kind of relationship over the past few months, mostly through supervised conversations with his therapist and carefully structured meetings in public places where I felt safe and he couldn't manipulate the situation. I still wasn't sure if I would ever be able to trust him completely, but I had reached a point where I could acknowledge that he had been as much a victim of Carmen and Miguel's manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. I drove to the coffee shop thinking about how different my life looked now compared to where I had been 6 months ago. I had a 3.8 GPA in my university classes, a work-study job at the campus writing center that I actually enjoyed, and a small but solid group of friends who supported my goals instead of undermining them. Alex and I had grown closer during the months I spent recovering from my family's betrayal, and by the time I left for university, we had developed the kind of relationship based on mutual support and respect that I hadn't even known was possible. Ethan was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, looking healthier than I had seen him in years. Therapy had been good for him in ways that went far beyond dealing with his role in the tire slashing conspiracy. He had finally gotten his GED and was enrolled in community college classes with the goal of eventually transferring to a 4-year university himself. More importantly, he seemed to be developing his own sense of identity separate from our parents' expectations and manipulations. How are things going at school? He asked after I sat down with my coffee. The conversation felt natural in a way that our interactions hadn't for years, probably because this was the first time we were talking as equals, rather than as siblings trapped in our parents' toxic dynamic. Really good, actually. I'm taking this sociology class about family systems and control mechanisms, and it's helping me understand a lot about what happened to us. I stirred sugar into my latte and studied his face for signs of defensiveness or manipulation, but he just looked genuinely interested in what I was learning. What kind of things are you studying?
Mostly about how controlling families use isolation and financial dependence to maintain power over adult children, and how they often recruit other family members to participate in the control system by making them feel like they're protecting the family or helping someone learn responsibility. I paused to see how he would react to this description of his own behavior. Ethan nodded slowly and looked down at his hands. That sounds exactly like what happened with us. I kept telling myself I was helping Mom keep our family together, but really I was just doing whatever she wanted because I was scared of losing the only approval and support I'd ever gotten from her. This was the kind of insight that his therapy had been helping him develop, and hearing him articulate it so clearly made me feel hopeful about the possibility of having a real relationship with him someday. Do you think you would have been able to see how wrong it was if someone outside the family had pointed it out to you? Honestly, probably not. I was so desperate for Mom and Dad to think I was worth something that I would have done almost anything they asked me to do. He took a sip of his coffee and met my eyes directly. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the damage I caused to your life, but I need you to know that I understand now how much I hurt you and how wrong it was. We talked for over an hour about our childhoods and the ways our parents had pitted us against each other from an early age. Ethan shared memories of Carmen telling him that I thought I was better than the rest of the family because of my academic success, while I told him about conversations where she had suggested that he was jealous of my achievements and couldn't be trusted to support my goals. Looking back, it was clear that she had been systematically undermining our sibling relationship for years as a way to maintain control over both of us. The thing that's hardest for me to accept, I said while watching students walk by outside the coffee shop window, is that I spent so many years believing that our family was normal and supportive when really we were being manipulated and controlled the whole time. Ethan leaned back in his chair and sighed. I've been thinking about that a lot too. Like, how many times did Mom convince me that you were being selfish or ungrateful when really you were just trying to build your own life? And how many times did she make me feel like I had to choose between supporting you and staying in her good graces? Did you ever try to tell Dad what was happening or ask him to intervene? A few times, but he always just said that Mom knew what was best for the family and that I should trust her judgment. He made it clear that questioning her decisions meant questioning him too, and that wasn't something he was going to tolerate. Ethan shook his head. I think he genuinely convinced himself that he wasn't involved in what was happening. But looking back, it's obvious that he knew exactly what was going on and chose to enable it. We talked about the legal proceedings and how our parents had reacted to being held accountable for their behavior. Carmen had completed her community service hours, but had shown no signs of understanding why her actions were wrong or harmful. She continued to maintain that she had been protecting our family and that the criminal charges were an overreaction by authorities who didn't understand the importance of family loyalty. Miguel had been slightly more responsive to the anger management classes, at least according to the court-mandated progress reports, but he still blamed me for destroying the family by involving police instead of handling the situation internally. Both of them had attempted to contact me indirectly through relatives and family friends, always with messages about forgiveness and reconciliation that completely ignored the need for them to acknowledge their wrongdoing and change their behavior. Have you thought about whether you'll ever want to have a relationship with them again, as we were finishing our coffee? I honestly don't know. Part of me misses the parents I thought I had before I understood what they were really doing to us. But I can't imagine having a safe relationship with the people they actually are unless they go through some major psychological changes that I'm not sure they're capable of making. I gathered up my textbooks and backpack. What about you? I'm not ready yet. My therapist says I need to focus on developing my own identity and building healthy relationships before I try to navigate that kind of complicated family dynamic again. He stood up and walked with me toward the parking lot. But I'm grateful that you've been willing to work on rebuilding things between us, even after everything I did.
Driving back to campus, I thought about how different this conversation had been from the family interactions I remembered from before the tire slashing incidents. There had been no manipulation, no guilt trips, no attempts to control my decisions or make me feel responsible for other people's emotions. Just honest communication between two people who were trying to understand their shared trauma and figure out how to move forward in a healthy way. That evening, I called Alex to tell him about my conversation with Ethan and to talk through some of the emotions that had come up during our meeting. This had become one of my favorite parts of our relationship, the way that we could discuss difficult topics openly without either of us trying to control the other person's reactions or convince them to feel differently about their experiences. "It sounds like he's really making progress in therapy," Alex said after I had described Ethan's insights about our family dynamics. "Do you think you can trust him not to get pulled back into your parents' manipulation if they try to reconnect with him?" "I'm not sure yet. I think he understands intellectually what happened and why it was wrong, but I don't know if he's developed enough emotional independence to resist them if they start applying pressure." I was lying on my dorm room bed looking at photos from high school that I had finally felt ready to go through.
And how studying family systems academically was helping me process my own experiences. There was something validating about reading research that confirmed what I had lived through, that family manipulation was a recognized pattern of abuse, that financial control was a common tactic used by controlling parents, and that sibling relationships were often damaged by parents who used children against each other to maintain power. "Have you thought about maybe specializing in family counseling or social work?" Alex asked. "It seems like you have a lot of insight into these dynamics that could help other people who are going through similar situations." The idea had occurred to me, especially after talking with Detective Martinez about how common family manipulation cases were and how often victims didn't recognize what was happening to them until the situation became extreme. There was something appealing about the possibility of using my experiences to help other people identify and escape from toxic family systems before they caused permanent damage. I've been thinking about it. My sociology professor said there are graduate programs that focus specifically on family systems and abuse intervention. It would mean several more years of school, but I think I might be interested in that kind of work. I set down the photos and looked out my dorm room window at the campus quad, where students were studying and socializing in the evening light. "Whatever you decide to do, I know you'll be amazing at it. You've already proven that you can survive the worst kind of family betrayal and come out stronger on the other side." After we hung up, I spent some time journaling about the day's conversations and reflecting on how much my life had changed since I first found those slashed tires in the community college parking lot. The financial cost had been devastating at the time, but in retrospect, it had been the catalyst that forced me to recognize the toxic patterns in my family and find the strength to break free from them. I thought about Mrs. Thompson and how her security cameras had provided the evidence I needed to expose the truth. I thought about Detective Martinez and how her willingness to take my concerns seriously had validated my perceptions when my own family was trying to convince me I was paranoid. I thought about Alex and how his support had shown me what healthy relationships could look like when they were based on mutual respect rather than control and manipulation. Most of all, I thought about my own resilience and how I had found the courage to trust my instincts, even when everyone around me was telling me I was wrong. The tire slashing incidents had been traumatic and expensive and emotionally devastating, but they had also taught me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined and capable of rebuilding my life from scratch when necessary. 6 months ago, I had been trapped in a toxic family system that was systematically undermining my independence and future prospects. Now, I was thriving academically, building healthy relationships, and developing the skills I would need to help other people escape from similar situations. The transformation hadn't been easy, and there were still days when I struggled with trust issues and anxiety about my family's potential for future manipulation.
But I had learned that healing from family trauma was possible, that I could build a support system of people who genuinely cared about my well-being, and that I had the strength to create the kind of life I wanted despite the obstacles that had been placed in my path. The girl who had called her parents for help after finding slashed tires was looking for rescue from people who were actually the source of her problems. The woman I had become was capable of rescuing herself and helping others do the same. That night, I updated my university advisor about my interest in family counseling graduate programs and started researching schools that specialized in trauma-informed therapy and family systems work. If my experiences could help even one other person recognize the signs of family manipulation and find the courage to seek help, then maybe all the pain and betrayal would have served a purpose, beyond just my own education and growth. The tire-slashing conspiracy was designed to keep me financially dependent and emotionally trapped, but instead, it had become the beginning of my journey toward true independence and meaningful work. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being the catalyst for the best changes we make in our lives, and I was finally ready to embrace that possibility and see where it would lead me next. 1 year later, I was standing in the parking lot of my old community college, looking at the exact spot where this whole nightmare had started, and for the first time since it happened, I wasn't feeling angry or traumatized or even particularly sad about what my family had done to me. I was there to meet with a journalism student who was writing an article about family manipulation and financial abuse for the campus newspaper, and she had asked me if I would be willing to share my story to help other students recognize the warning signs. The irony of being back in that parking lot wasn't lost on me, because exactly 1 year ago, I had been a completely different person, standing in the same place, calling my parents for help, and trusting them to support me through what I thought was random vandalism. Now, I understood that the real vandalism had been happening inside my own home for years, and that the tire slashing had just been the visible symptom of a much deeper problem. Alex was waiting for me by his car, and when he saw me walking across the parking lot, he smiled in that way that still made my heart skip a beat, even after dating for over a year. We had both transferred to State University, but we still came back to this campus sometimes because it was where we had first become allies, and then friends, and eventually something more meaningful than either of us had expected. "How did the interview go?" he asked while opening my car door for me, in that old-fashioned way that reminded me daily how different healthy relationships felt compared to the manipulation I had grown up thinking was normal. Really well, I think. She asked good questions about how to recognize when family concern is actually control, and how financial dependence can be weaponized by people who claim to love you. I buckled my seatbelt and looked back at the community college building where I had spent 2 years trying to save money for a transfer that my own family had been systematically sabotaging. We drove to the coffee shop where Ethan and I had been meeting monthly for supervised conversations as part of his continued therapy and our attempt to rebuild some kind of sibling relationship. These meetings had become easier over time as we both learned to communicate without the toxic dynamics our parents had taught us, and I was cautiously optimistic that we might eventually have something resembling a normal brother-sister relationship. Ethan was already waiting at our usual table, and he looked healthier and more confident than I had seen him since we were kids. Community college had been good for him, and he was planning to transfer to a 4-year university in the fall to study social work, inspired partly by his own experiences with therapy and partly by watching me navigate my recovery from family trauma. He had some news, he said after we had all sat down with our drinks. "I got accepted to the social work program at State University for next fall, so we'll actually be on the same campus again." I felt a complicated mix of emotions about this announcement because while I was proud of his academic progress and grateful for how much work he had put into therapy and personal growth, I still wasn't completely sure I was ready to have him back in my daily life in such a direct way. "That's amazing, Ethan. How do you feel about it?" Alex asked while I was still processing my own reaction. "Nervous, but excited. I know it's going to be weird being on the same campus where Sheena has built her new life, but I'm hoping it might be good for both of us to see that we can have a healthy relationship now. Ethan looked me directly. I don't want to intrude on your space or make you uncomfortable, but I would like the chance to prove that I'm not the same person who hurt you. We talked for about an hour about practical things like housing and class schedules and how to maintain appropriate boundaries while still being supportive of each other's goals. It was the kind of conversation that would have been impossible a year ago, when we were both still trapped in our parents' manipulation, but now felt natural and productive. "Have you heard anything from Mom and Dad lately?" I asked as we were getting ready to leave. They sent me a graduation card when I finished my associate's degree, but it was full of the same guilt trips about how I'm abandoning the family and pursuing education instead of staying home and taking care of them. Ethan shook his head. "My therapist and I talked about it, and we agreed that I'm not ready for that kind of contact yet."
Good morning. I understood exactly what he meant because I had received similar attempts at communication that always focused on what I owed the family rather than acknowledging what they had done wrong or expressing genuine interest in my well-being. Driving back to campus with Alex, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. I had gone from being a financially trapped community college student with no understanding of healthy family dynamics to being a confident university student with clear boundaries and meaningful relationships. The tire-slashing conspiracy that was supposed to keep me dependent and controlled had instead become the catalyst for the most important growth and healing of my life. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive your parents for what they did?" Alex asked as we pulled into our apartment complex. "I think forgiveness is probably something I'll work toward eventually, but right now I'm more focused on protecting myself and building the life I want rather than worrying about repairing relationships with people who haven't shown any real understanding of why their behavior was harmful." I gathered my textbooks from the back seat. Maybe someday they'll do the kind of personal work that would make a relationship possible. But I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that to happen. That night, I updated my journal with reflections on the day's conversations and my continued recovery from family trauma. The girl who had started this journal, documenting tire-slashing incidents, would barely recognize the woman I had become. But she would be proud to know that her determination to find the truth had eventually led to freedom and healing, and the ability to help other people facing similar situations. Sometimes the worst betrayals end up being the greatest gifts because they force us to develop strength we didn't know we had and to build the kind of life we actually want instead of settling for what other people think we deserve. My family's conspiracy to control my future had ultimately given me complete ownership of it, and I was finally ready to see where that freedom would take me next. 5 years after the tire-slashing incidents ended, I was sitting in my office at the Family Crisis Center reviewing case files for my newest clients when I noticed something that made me stop and stare at the paperwork spread across my desk. A 24-year-old woman named Maria had come in seeking help after her family had been systematically sabotaging her job applications and college enrollment attempts by providing fake references and contacting her potential employers with lies about her character and reliability. The pattern was so familiar, it gave me chills that started in my chest and spread all the way down to my fingertips. Financial control disguised as family concern, sabotage presented as protection, adult children being kept dependent through manufactured obstacles that looked like bad luck, but were actually coordinated attacks on their independence. Maria's story was different from mine in the specific details, but identical in the underlying dynamics of manipulation and control that I had spent years learning to recognize and understand. I had been working as a family trauma counselor for 2 years since graduating with my master's degree in social work from State University, and cases like Maria's were exactly why I chose this field, despite the emotional difficulty of constantly being reminded of my own family's betrayal.
every time I helped someone recognize that their family's concern was actually abuse. Every time I provided evidence and validation to someone whose reality was being questioned and denied, I remembered what it felt like to be told I was paranoid and ungrateful when I was actually being systematically victimized by the people who claimed to love me most. Maria knocked on my office door and stuck his head in with that smile that still made my day better, even after 4 years of marriage and countless ordinary Tuesday afternoons when he showed up to take me to lunch. Ready for Thai food? I made reservations at that place where they know to make your pad thai extra spicy because you're the only person they've ever met who actually wants it hot enough to hurt. We had gotten married 2 years ago in a small ceremony attended by Mrs. Thompson, Detective Martinez, Alex's entire extended family, who had welcomed me with the kind of unconditional support I had never experienced before, Ethan, and about 15 friends from college and work who represented the chosen family I had built to replace the biological one that had tried to destroy my future. Carmen and Miguel were not invited and had not attempted to contact me since sending a passive-aggressive greeting card expressing disappointment that I was continuing to punish the family by excluding them from major life events, despite their complete inability to acknowledge wrongdoing or show genuine remorse. Let me just finish these notes for Maria's case, and I'll be ready to go, I said while saving my files and locking my computer with the same careful attention to client confidentiality that had become second nature after 2 years of helping people navigate family trauma. This one is hitting close to home because the family dynamics are so similar to what we went through, right down to the parents convincing other family members to participate in the sabotage. At lunch, we talked about our work and our plans for the weekend and the house we were hoping to buy in the neighborhood near Alex's automotive shop and my counseling center. Normal couple conversations about normal couple concerns like mortgage rates and whether we wanted a fenced yard for the dog we were planning to adopt, which still felt miraculous to me sometimes because I had spent so many years thinking that families were supposed to be sources of stress and manipulation rather than support and encouragement and shared dreams for the future. "How's Ethan doing with his new job at the Domestic Violence Center?" Alex asked while we were sharing pad thai and spring rolls and catching up on the ordinary details of our separate but connected lives. "Really well, from what I can tell. His supervisor says he's particularly effective with male clients who've been manipulated by family members because he understands from personal experience how shame and guilt can make people participate in abuse even when they know it's wrong." I smiled thinking about how far my brother had come from the confused and desperate teenager who had slashed my tires in exchange for parental approval he never should have had to earn through hurting someone else. Ethan and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully over the years, with regular check-ins and clear boundaries that protected both of us from falling back into old patterns of dysfunction and manipulation. He had never stopped taking responsibility for his role in the tire-slashing conspiracy, and he had done the hard work of understanding how his need for parental approval had made him vulnerable to being used as a weapon against me while simultaneously being victimized by the same system of control that had trapped us both. "Are you still planning to testify at that family court hearing next week?" Alex asked while signaling for the check, and probably already thinking about the afternoon he had ahead of him installing brake pads and changing oil and doing the kind of honest work that helped people instead of hurting them. I nodded while finishing my tea and mentally reviewing the testimony I had prepared about financial manipulation as a form of domestic abuse. The judge wants to hear from professionals who work with family manipulation cases, and I think my testimony might help them understand that the financial control in this custody case is actually a form of abuse rather than legitimate parental concern about a young mother's spending habits. This had become an important part of my work, helping family court judges and child protective services workers recognize that financial manipulation and systematic sabotage are serious forms of abuse that can cause lasting psychological damage to victims who often don't even realize they're being abused until the pattern has been going on for years. Too many judges still viewed these behaviors as family disputes rather than criminal harassment. And expert testimony from people who understand the dynamics is crucial for protecting victims and their children. After lunch, I went back to work and spent the afternoon meeting with Maria to help her develop a safety plan for escaping her family's control without putting herself at risk for retaliation or escalation. We talked about documenting incidents, building external support systems, opening bank accounts they couldn't access, and recognizing that her family's claims about loving and protecting her were completely inconsistent with their actions of undermining and sabotaging her attempts at independence and success. "That's the most painful part of this kind of abuse," I replied while thinking about my own journey toward accepting the truth about Carmen and Miguel and their systematic campaign to keep me financially dependent and emotionally trapped. When the people who are supposed to support your growth and independence are actually the ones preventing it, it creates cognitive dissonance that can take years to resolve because it challenges everything you believed about love and family and protection. By the end of our session, Maria had developed a comprehensive plan for applying to college using a friend's address, setting up her own bank account at a different institution than her family used, and gradually reducing her family's access to information about her life and goals. It was the same kind of plan I had implemented 5 years ago when I realized that my family's version of love was actually a prison designed to keep me trapped and dependent, and that real love would have supported my dreams.
Driving home that evening, I thought about the long path from victim to survivor to helper that had brought me to this point in my life where I could use my worst experiences to help other people recognize and escape from similar situations. The tire-slashing incidents that were supposed to keep me financially trapped and emotionally dependent had instead become the beginning of my journey toward meaningful work, helping other people break free from family systems that claimed to protect them while actually controlling and limiting their potential. Mrs. Thompson still sent me Christmas cards with updates about the neighborhood and reminders that her security cameras were always available if anyone needed evidence of harassment or abuse. Detective Martinez had become a friend, an occasional referral source when her cases involved family manipulation that required therapeutic intervention rather than just legal consequences. These connections reminded me daily that crisis could create lasting positive relationships and that the people who helped me during my worst time had become permanent parts of my support system. That night, Alex and I sat on our apartment balcony, planning our weekend and talking about the family we hoped to start in a few years, once we had bought our house and settled into our careers, and created the kind of stable, healthy foundation that would allow us to raise children who knew the difference between love and control. The conversation was full of excitement and possibility, rather than fear and manipulation, which reminded me daily how different healthy relationships felt compared to the dysfunction I had grown up thinking was normal and unavoidable. The girl who had called her parents for help after finding slashed tires could never have imagined that her worst family crisis would eventually lead to her best professional calling and most meaningful personal relationships. Sometimes the people who try hardest to limit our futures end up giving us exactly the experiences we need to build the lives we're meant to live, and help others do the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.